All right.
Okay.
You are good. There it goes.
All
Okay.
right.
All yours.
Well, we're going to be talking about ghosts, spirits, and apparitions today, going from the ancient world all the way up to today, with, of course, an anthropological lens. I want to say that one constant around the world, both today and in the past, is the belief not only in the supernatural, but in what are often called ghosts. The problem is there exists, I have to say, a great confusion around this world for this word, excuse me, for what exactly is a ghost, right? What is it? Is a ghost the spirit of a lost soul? Is a ghost a spirit of a soul that is sending a specific message or prophecy? Is it a telepathic entity that maybe enters our mind? Is it like the Matrix, glitches in the fabric of time and space? Are they spirit beings that have never been, ever been living souls? Or perhaps holding into a Judeo Christian paradigm, they're angels or demons, maybe a natural phenomenon, right? Or historical echo that occurs when the time or the temperature is just right. Or perhaps a ghost is merely an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. Where do we hear that from, right? The famous Christmas carol. What is most curious is that from the ancient world, including the Greco Roman times to the present day, this is important. The descriptions of ghosts are more alike than they are different. They really are. And it really throws me off at times when I'm studying ghosts in all these different cultures, going across to the Aztecs, the Mayans, the ancient Chinese, going into the Polynesian cultures, going into sub-Saharan Africa, going into Europe, and the indigenous peoples of the Americas and so many other places. And you know what? We keep hearing same ghost stories over and over again with some of the same tropes. It's amazing. Now, there's a few ways of looking at this. I always kind of break it down to kind of three. One is that maybe one of the reasons why there's so many similarities is because, well, maybe it's tradition, oral tradition. As we migrate, we tend to tell, we may have told similar stories, and those stories spread with us as we migrated into different areas, and that's why they're so similar. Now, how do you explain the similarity of ghost stories in places that have been really isolated over a period of time? Which kind of brings me to the second possibility. The second possibility is that, well, maybe the reason is that we are all humans. We all have a similar psychological makeup, and so we look at information, we disseminate different bits of information, and we understand it in a similar way, and that's why we have all these commonalities. Of course, the third way of looking at it is, ooh, maybe there really is ghosts, and that's why we are experiencing them in similar ways. See, so there are different ways of looking at it. Okay, um, but in now I have to say that yeah, there's similar stories and ideas across cultures, right? But there still are differences, and we'll go over those differences as we go through this. The problem is that research into ghosts is often viewed as a pseudoscience. All right, so let's go into some perspectives before we, you know, jump into the topic at hand. According to Dennis and Michael Waskell's Ghostly Encounters, published in 2016, um, the idea is that um, many participants were not even sure in their studies if they encountered a ghost and they remained uncertain that such phenomena were possible, simply because they did not see something that approximated the conventional image of a ghost. Instead, they noticed that many of those who were involved with this research were convinced that they were simply seeing something uncanny, something inexplicable, extraordinary, mysterious, maybe even eerie, but not necessarily a ghost. Anthropologists, I've been awake all day. uh, Anthropologists Joseph Baker and Christopher Bonner, in one of their works on the anthropology of the 20th century ghosts, 2014, state that field work with multiple groups centered on hunting ghosts revealed several notable themes, including rhetorical appeals to both science and religion, magical rites, the extensive use of technology to mediate evidence and experiences of ghosts, and the narrative construction of hauntings. They say we argue that the inherent liminality of spirits as cultural constructs accounts for their persistence, power, and continual recurrence. What am I saying in English? Fact that they are really very much pushed to the margins in the realms of the liminal, that we just, we can't fully prove them, make them even more enticing, make them even more intoxicating, make them worthy of conversation, because we as humans enjoy stories of wonderment. We love to be bewildered and perhaps even a little terrified, right? It makes us feel alive, right? Well, according to Benjamin Radford, our ghosts are real, according to Live Science, 2017. There are many contradictions inherent in ideas about ghosts. Either they can move through solid walls without disturbing them, or they can slam doors and throw objects across the room. Can they do one thing? They just pass through things, or the other. According to the laws of physics, it is either one thing or another, they claim. If ghosts are human souls, why did they appear clothed and with presumably soulless objects like hats and canes and dresses? Not to mention the many reports of ghost trains and cars and carriages. So there are many possibilities looking at ghosts. Many possibilities. Todd Thompson says ghost stories are one of those things that have never been proven, but have also never been disproven, right? Science can't really disprove that ghosts exist, right? Americans believe something that both their science and their religious leaders tell them not to believe. And the very fact that they're told not to believe these ideas, and they still believe these ideas, perhaps suggests a possibility that these ideas, these possibilities, this phenomenology really does exist. I mean, there's many ideas. But let's go back to the ancient world, shall we? People have believed in ghosts even before the written records. I mean, one example of that is people fearing that we're going to come back, is that many places we have found during the Paleolithic and the Neolithic age, we have a penchant for cutting people's heads off after they die. Why would you cut a person's head off? Well, also to add to that, they'll even cut their feet off. Obviously, they're trying to tell you they don't want them to get around. They're cutting their feet off and their head off because they fear that, well, maybe something is going to happen. But in ancient cultures, right, in many ancient cultures, to people then, there was no doubt that the soul of a human being survived bodily death. So whatever an individual's personal view on the subject, according to them, the dead lived on in another form. The afterlife was largely dictated by several factors: the kind of life they lived on Earth, how their remains were disposed of at their death, how they were remembered by the living. All these factors kind of play around. But all ancient cultures held that the dead could come back to haunt the living. They all did. They all did. In fact, as I get closer, there is no exception to the rule. Isn't that fascinating? Not one culture from antiquity says that there is not such thing as a ghost that we know of. Isn't that fascinating? Isn't that interesting? Just kind of. So the question is not whether ghosts exist for those in the ancient world. The question is, why are there ghosts? That's the kind of inquiry they were all about, right? So what were some of the reasons, right? Well, reasons could include as follows, if you want to write these down, could include improper funeral rites. If they were not buried in a proper way, then they're going to come back to haunt you. And that is true from ancient China all the way across to ancient prehistoric Europe. Another is a lack of any kind of burial. Ghosts don't like that. They don't have an actual burial. Death by drowning, where the body was never recovered, is a big one. Murder in which the body was never found, right? Or to resolve some unfinished business, maybe to provide a true account of the events that happened after their death, such as, who murdered them, maybe even to fulfill a need to avenge the murderer or to seek justice in order to finally rest in peace, right? So there's a few reasons why, right? And these stories are everywhere. Constant. Let's go to Mesopotamia. Why not? Let's start there. By the way, we're going to actually tell lots of ghost stories. I hope you don't mind. I have lots of ghost stories to tell, and they're pretty interesting, right? Okay, in Mesopotamia, death was the final act of life from which there usually were no return. They went to a place called Urkala. That is a very dark realm, the land of no return. It is a very dreary place where you fed off the dirt and you sipped from mud puddles in many cases, or you went around and squeaked like a bat. And it was seen by the Dark Queen Ershkigal, right? Now, however, you weren't there always forever because a special dispensation was given to souls who needed to complete some kind of mission. What kind of mission? Well, the ones I just outlined above. Were they buried properly? Were they buried at all? Are you even remembering them? Or did you forget them along the way? Were they murdered? Was there reasons for them to seek vengeance? Or are they giving some kind of message? All of this is the exception to the rule. And you're going to see this quite a bit. The funny thing is, the doctors of ancient Mesopotamia, known as the Asu and the Asupu, employed spells that would placate the ghosts. But before such treatment began, the doctor would actually ask the patient to honestly confess any sins that they may have done to call the ghost to arrive from the underworld at all. Because in Mesopotamia, there was a direct connection between what you've done wrong in life and the ghost coming back to take care of business in connection to what you've done. You make yourself vulnerable to being haunted if you do various sins. And sometimes ghosts in ancient Mesopotamia made you very sick. It made you ill. So you are possessed by a ghost who makes you sick. And if you confess your sin or what you've done wrong, then maybe good things will happen. There's also a spiritual entity known as a Gidim, a Gidim, that was created, which maintained the personal identity of the deceased and traveled on to the land of the dead. Sometimes the Gidim uh, were mischievous, and they would slip out of the dark depths of Erkala for visits to the earth. In this case, these ghosts are tricksters, and they do have some connections with those known as the jinn, right? Later on. In ancient Egypt, the return of a ghost was considered a very serious matter because let's be honest, the Egyptians, they really have the afterworld wired pretty well, right? They embalm the body, and then at a certain point, obviously, you go through the various levels or descent, and you arrive at the judgment place. Your heart is weighed against the feather, and then you either go to a happy place known as the field of reeds, or you are swallowed by a mitt for all eternity. It's pretty easy, right? But and your ba and ka will come together to form the ak. But every now and then, if you don't do the following, which I just mentioned, I don't want to repeat myself over and over again, but improper burial, unfinished business. Are you guys getting this? A vengeance, the ghost or spirit will come back. So usually it's not a good thing. I kind of feel sorry for this one Egyptian. His wife kept coming back from the dead and constantly bothered him, haunted him day in and day out. And he had enough because he couldn't think of anything that he did wrong. So archaeologists have actually found a note that he left in his wife's tomb where he's pleading with this spirit that he is innocent of any wrongdoing. I'm going to go ahead and read the note. Why not? He says to his wife, this is the note, "What wicked thing have I done to you that I should have come to this evil pass? What have I done to you? But what you have done to me is to have laid hands on me, although I have nothing, having done anything wicked to you. For the time I live with you as your husband down to today, what have I done to you that I need hide? When you did become sick of the illness of which you had, I caused the master physician to be fetched. I spent 8 months without eating and drinking like a man. I wept exceedingly together with my household in front of my street corner. I gave linen clothes to wrap thee, and left no benefit undone that I had to perform for you. And now behold, I have spent 3 years alone without entering into a house, though it is not right that one like me should have to do it. This have I done for your sake, but behold, you don't know good from bad." He's telling the spirit of his wife, "You're haunting me for nothing. I've done everything correct. I've placated you. I've done the right rituals, everything, and you're still not happy with me." So we discover this note later on. It kind of tells you a lot, right? Um, Also, the Egyptians did make another exception when it came to encountering ghosts, and that is through what's called incubation chambers. The petitioner could go to a special building and communicate with the gods or deceased relatives in order to gain insight into the future. So there's another possibility, right? Um, so, excuse me, the ancient Greeks, when it comes to their idea of the afterlife, I'm not going to talk all about it here because it's too interesting to me, and I'll go down that slippery slope and we'll never get out alive. But I'm sorry, but basically, the Greeks, they have the idea where when you die, based upon what you do, you go ahead and cross. I'm talking again, aren't I? Crossing the river Styx. Yeah, right. They'll go through the various levels, right? Obviously the innocents, the suicides, and the warriors, and so forth. And you finally get down to the judgment seat, and based upon what you do, you either take the left hand, which of course is Tartarus, where you suffer and all these terrible things happen, pouring molten lead down your throat, which is not too fun. You get drowned, and then you get drowned again, over and over again. Or you go to the right, and you go to a place that's a paradise-like place. Elysian fields for the heroes, the plain of Asphodel for those who are good people, and there you have it. And that's pretty much it. But the problem is there's always exceptions. And once again, we're back to improper burials and vengeance. And, we need to get, and of course, obviously to give messages too. That's another one. So one of the earliest ghost stories is the ghost of Patroclus. Ghost of Patroclus, this story is told in the Iliad. Basically, Achilles, his deceased best friend, approaches him and reproaches him for not giving him well, guess what? A proper burial. And so Patroclus appears to him, quote, all in his likeness for a stature and lovely eyes and voice, and wore such clothing as Patroclus had worn on his body. So right away, we have a ghost story that has them wearing clothes that which he wore in life. And he was familiar to Achilles. And he said things like, Patroclus says, sleep you and me, have you not forgotten, Achilles? Not in my life. You were neglectful of me, but in death, well, bury me soon that I may pass the gates of Hades. Far off the souls, shadows of the dead repel me, nor suffer me to join them on the riverbank. But as it is, thus I roam around the wide-doored house of Hades. Yeah, he's not too happy. So he threatens to continually haunt in dreams his old companion until he gets a proper burial. Guess what? He gets a proper burial. But it's a happily ever after kind of story. Achilles really does love his best friend. With his own arms, he reaches for him. That is the ghost of Patroclus, but could not take him. But the spirit went underground like a vapor with a thin cry. And of course, we do have Odysseus in the Odyssey, another story where he goes into the underworld. It's an interesting bit where he is supposed to seek Tiresias, right, the great soothsayer. But while that is going on, he meets his dead mother. Yeah, he meets his dead mom. It's really kind of upsetting. My child, how did you come beneath the murky darkness, being still alive? Hard is it for those that live to behold these realms, for between are great rivers and dread streams. And so this is a heart-wrenching scene. Odysseus attempts to embrace his mother's shade, and 3 times he reaches out, and she is unable to be held because for no longer the sinews hold the flesh and bones together, but the strong might of blazing fire destroys these as soon as life leaves the white bones, and the spirit like a dream flits away and hovers to and fro. Oh, he also runs into Elpenor. Yeah. Elpenor, he was drinking on Circe's rooftop. He drank too much and he fell off the roof and he died. Okay, so what happens here, as you can guess, is well, Elpenor says, "Can you give me a proper burial, please?" So it's all about being proper, right? And obviously, the Aeneid, Virgil's Aeneid, has more ghost stories. The Greeks and the Romans did have various tales and festivals connected to ghosts. And I want to bring up one. It's called the Lemuria. How many people have ever heard of the Lemuria? Anybody here? Lemuria? Okay, Lemuria. This is when basically the unsettled and sometimes malevolent dead, known as lemurs, prowl around your house. You have unwanted house guests. Ovid said that these lemurs, these undead, appear around midnight. The worshiper, who is the head of the house, in order to ward away these lemurs, was to make a special sign with his thumb. Right? Special thumb like this, special sign with his thumb in the middle of his forehead with washed hands from a clean spring water. And then he was to take black beans and throw them with an averted face, saying 3 times, "These I cast, with these I redeem me and mine." And so you do this and you throw the beans because, the lemurs will then chase after the beans that you throw outside the house and try to possess them. I know. There's a whole mythology around beans. Beans are believed to have special powers, and apparently they still have special powers if you eat too many of them. But special powers, and unfortunately, a guy by the name of Pythagoras was so scared of various kinds of beans that he didn't run through a bean patch, and that's how he died. He was too afraid. Anyway, but also the whole household clashed bronze pots and declared, "A ghost of my fathers and ancestors be gone." So you got the thumb, and of course the averting face, the declaration, throwing the beans, and everybody's hitting metal around, and that will scare the lemurs away. But let's start talking stories. Romans, they love haunted house stories. They really do. And one of the first haunted house stories that we come across is in the playwright known as Plautus, 254 to 184 BCE. And he tells a story of a rich Athenian merchant. His name is Theopropides, who goes away on business and leaves the operation of his home to his son. And the son, this is the typical story. The son, dad's away. And when dad's away, it's time to have a party. And so he celebrates constantly with his friends, and he hangs around a slave girl that he loves, and he gets really drunk. And guess who comes home early? That's right. So he has to stall for time. And how is he going to stall for time? Because he has all these guests in his house. Well, he tells Dad, Dad, there's a ghost in the house. That's right. In fact, I first saw him in a dream in the dead of night while the torches were still lit, and it informed me that there was somebody that was murdered in the house long ago by this real villainous host. He killed him for gold. So this ghost of this murdering man house. So we got to do a few things to clean it out. Already have cleansing rituals. Are you seeing this? So, Dad, I don't want you to enter the house. And so what happened is that he bought time for his parting friends through this lie to leave through the back door. So Dad supposedly would never know. So you can now, of course, there's lots of mess ups here. For example, Roman historians will quickly note that only ghosts that are familiar to you will appear to you in a dream. So already they got, the guy messed up his own story. And so all the Romans reading this going, oh, what a dead giveaway. This is a stranger ghost. The next story his name is Phlegon of Tralles. I've actually been to Tralles in Asia Minor. It's from the 2nd century. And it tells the story of, this is a really weird story, but I want to tell it. It's a story of certain Philinian. And Philinian was married to one of Alexander the Great's generals by the name of Craterus. But after 6 months of marriage, Philinian dies. And so what happens is an interesting story. Oh boy, here we go. So apparently, Felinian didn't find satisfaction with the general. And so she decided to return from the grave to find some satisfaction. So she returned in ghostly form to her parents' house and to her own bedroom. At that time, they had a guest staying there. His name is Machates, Machates, and he's sleeping in her bed because they're having guests over. I mean, she's long dead. And apparently, she takes a liking to him. Of course, this is over and over again. The author says this is a true story. So, and so she has a relationship, a physical relationship with this man, and sleeps with him, and they become lovers. Well, the nurse who lives in the house takes a peek and sees through a crack in the door. It's the daughter. She's returned. What is she doing? So, but the first night, she doesn't say anything. Second night, she decides to tell her parents. And so what happens is the third night, actually the second night, the parents go, "Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, you're crazy. You're making this up." Third night, it's always the third night. You know how that works. The third night, the parents decide that they're gonna jump in and see their daughter. Before that part, sorry. Between the second and the third nights, I want to mention is that they interviewed the guy and said, "Hey, what's going on? You know, I mean, we're hearing from the nurse that you're kind of with our daughter." And he says, "Oh, I don't know." And they ask, "Well, what's her name?" And, "Well, her name is Felinian." "Yeah, that's our daughter." Yeah, and she gave me this ring. "Yeah, that's the ring she was buried with." So the third night, the parents are ready, and they jump, and she is so upset that she disappears. Well, actually, not disappears. She disappears as far as life is concerned. She actually falls dead like a corpse. What? Yeah, so the material corpse. So, oh, wait, what happened there? So what they do is then they go to her grave and they dig the grave and they discover her body is not there. But they also discover that the lover's goblet happens to be in the grave. So there's a kind of an exchange between a ring and a goblet. And the long and the short of it is that she never came back. But apparently, again, she was not satisfied in life. And she decided to have a special rendezvous in the afterlife. And she had 3 days of fun, apparently, or at least 2.5 days. Okay, moving right along. There's another story that I want to go into. There's so many of these. Oh, boy. Okay. There it is. So Pliny the Younger. Pliny the Younger tells lots of stories, and his classic story is really the beginning of a normal ghost story that we know so well. There is he tells the story of a philosopher by the name of Athenodorus, who comes to Athens and hears of a haunted house that is going cheaply because everybody's afraid of ghosts who haunt it. So Athenodorus rents the house, right? I mean, everybody's looking for cheap rent. Place is haunted, perfect. So what happens is that in the dead of night, a noise was often heard resembling the clashing of iron, which, if you listen carefully, sounded like the rattling of chains. Oh, here we go. The rattling chains trope. The noise would seem to be a distance away, but it would start coming closer and closer and closer And yes, I'm actually reading the primary source, and it does say closer and closer and closer for dramatic effect. Okay, the Romans love telling stories. Immediately after this, a specter would appear in the form of an old man, emaciated and squalid, with bristling hair and a long beard, and rattling the chains on his hands and feet as he moved. Of course, Athenodorus decided to, well, as opposed to being scared of the ghost, he decided to follow the ghost, to realize that it must have some kind of message. The ghost beckoned him with an outstretched finger. Wow, this is really some of those classic ideas of telling him to go outside. So he goes outside after beckoning him with one finger. And so he picks up his lamp, the philosopher, and he goes to a certain spot. And the ghost points at that spot, almost like a Charles Dickens story, points to a certain spot. And so the very next day, he returns to that spot, he marks it, he dig it up, and what do they find? Yes, they find a skeleton of a man intertwined with chains that had been buried for a very long time. And so he received the proper burial and he was seen no more. Love that story, right? Well, then we have a few others. Of course, Plutarch tells a story of a certain Damon who was a very bad man, and he haunted a bathing establishment. People would hear his moans all night long, and eventually they had to close the place down and block up the door, and the place was abandoned. So there goes that story. You also have the story of Apulus tells his stories. Apulus, what he does, I'm covering this part here. Oh yeah, this story is this is a really messed up story. You want to hear a messed up story? Here's a messed up ghost story right here. Okay, so the story is, oh wow, all right. The reason why I'm pausing is it's not bad. Okay, once upon a time, there's a man by the name of Thrasyllus, and Thrasyllus, he falls in love with Charity, who is the wife of his friend Telepolemius. And Thrasyllus, what he does is he's jealous that his best buddy, old pal, has his lady, the lady that he loves, the lady he dreams of, and so he invites his best friend one day to go out hunting, and he murders him. Okay, well, the murdered lover returns to Charity. He appears in a dream. It's actually his wife, and tells her how he died, and asks her to avenge him. In fact, he appears all mangled in the manner of death, and he called his wife his eternal spouse. So what she does is invite the man who loved her, offers him some wine and drugs the wine, and then she blinds him with her hairpins, claiming that death is too easy a punishment. And then after that, she kills herself. And after that, what he does is he's so miserable, he's blind, he eventually finds himself the tomb in which his old previous friend was buried. And he enters into that tomb. And then what he does is he kills himself by starvation in the tomb. Isn't it a beautiful story? It kind of brings some tears to your eyes. Yeah, okay. There's other stories too. One story tells about the miller's wife. Long story again, short, she committed various affairs. Her husband does not want to have her come back to the house. And so what she does is she consults with a person who does black magic and calls out a woman that had been murdered and so that woman then goes and murders him. So just like Japanese ghosts, you have a possibility that even Roman ghosts can actually murder you. Well, lots of fun stories, or maybe two fun stories. But I want to tell you a really interesting tale. You know how we sit around talking about the fact, are ghost stories really real or not? Did you know that Romans sat around telling stories, asking the same questions? Are ghosts really real or not? And so Lucian, from 125 to 180 CE, he wrote a work called The Liar. And what they did is, the story really is a group of guys sitting around telling ghost stories, just like we do today. They're sitting around and they're trying to do kind of one-upmanship. Who tells the best ghost story? So one of the stories goes as follows. Eucrates talks about how I heard a voice like a thunderclap. I saw a terrible woman approaching, not much less than 300 feet high. That's a tall woman. She carried a torch in her left hand and a sword in her right. The sword might be 30 feet long. Wow. Talk about tall tale. Literally tall. Okay. Her lower extremities were thus of a dragon, but her upper part was like Medusa. Instead of hair, she had clusters of snakes. It looks just like Medusa, right? And they'll go, wow, that's a pretty good story. Then Cleodemus says, oh, yeah? Well, guess what? I was ill for a few days, and the fever hit me pretty hard. And I woke up to find a handsome young man standing at my side in a white cloak. He raised me up from the dead and conducted me through a sort of chasm into Hades. And so he tells the story of how he became a ghost. He saw the underworld, but he was brought back. Another says, well, I know of a man who rose from the dead 20 days after he had been buried. I attended him both before his death and after his resurrection. So somebody's going, I saw that. Then another one says, oh, yeah, well, I got a better story. Oh, no. The story goes as follows. I was fond of my saintly wife. I showed great treatment towards her, not only in her lifetime, but even after her death. For I ordered all the jewels and clothes that she had valued to be burned upon her pyre. So isn't that nice? So he's going to give her a farewell. He's going to take all her jewelry, all her finery, even her best clothes, and they're going to burn with her. That seems like a noble thing, right? Well, on the seventh day after her death, sitting here on this very couch, as might be known, trying to find comfort for my afflictions and Plato's book about the soul, I was quietly reading, when, of course, I saw her. I threw my arms about her neck and wept out loud. She bade me cease. Complained. But she complained that though I had consulted her wishes in everything else, I had neglected to burn one of her golden sandals and had only burned its fellow. Really? While still conversing, a hateful little Maltese terrier that lay under the couch started barking, and my wife immediately vanished. Apparently, he doesn't like dogs. The sandal, however, was found beneath the chest, and it was eventually burned. And then she was placated. Can you believe it? He forgot one sandal, and she came back from the dead and say, hey, you know what? You got to burn that too. It's an accident. I didn't mean to. Oh, yeah. Okay. So there's still totally more stories. By the way, uh, there's a skeptic amongst them, and he calls them cock and bull stories. Like I said, I think it's funny how relevant these people are to today. Okay, and they're saying, well, we are trying our best, right? We are. They're saying we are only trying to convince this man of adamant belief that there are such things as supernatural beings and ghosts, and that the spirits of the dead walk the earth and manifest themselves to whomever they will, right? And they say that a spirit only walks if its owner met with a violent death, even if he was strangled, for instance, or beheaded or crucified, and not if he died a natural death. But he maintains that there's absolutely no such thing as an apparition. And he says, you deny the existence of the supernatural when there is scarcely a man who has not seen some evidence for it. Doesn't it sound like current day? So this skeptic, he's not believing. And they're saying, you deny the existence of the supernatural, even when there's scarcely a man who has not seen some evidence for it. But he said, I do not believe in the supernatural because, unlike the rest of mankind, I do not see it. And so the same, I'm serious, the Greeks and the Romans, especially the Romans, tell exactly the same stories we tell today, the same kinds of ghost stories, especially told in Western culture in the United States, right? We tell the same stories. These kind of sound familiar, do they not? You know, the funny thing is they also sit around saying, obviously, you know, we believe in it, but there's always skeptics who do not believe in it, right? Okay, and so obviously you're not going to. This is a very long section, but let's keep on going. Any questions so far? Right, we're covering quite a bit of materials. I want to keep on going. Let's move on to the Chinese. Think the Chinese are going to be any different? No. In the Chinese culture, they have the same exact same ideas. Once again, those who drowned, died alone, died in battle, suffered some kind of affliction. Once upon a time, there was a ghost by the name of Tupo. What happened is before he died, Tupo served as a minister of the Chinese Emperor Husan. The two had a disagreement, and so the emperor had Tupo killed. But Tupo had warned him, if you would do this, I'm going to kill you. And so what happened is that 2 years later, the emperor was killed with an arrow fired by an apparition resembling Tupo in front of an assembly of feudal lords. And so there is that exact vengeance idea. Chinese philosopher Mo Ti, he lived from 470 to 391, argued in favor of accepting the report of the existence of the ghost Tupo, returning to life itself. He declares, if from antiquity to the present, and since the beginning of man, there are men who have seen the bodies of ghosts and spirits and heard their voices, how can we say that they do not exist? Quote. So once again, Chinese believe it's true and absolutely true. And of course, because of Chinese, you have even a festival. You have the Day of the Dead like festival, in which known as the Ghost Month. This time is thought to be a time of the veil is thin between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead. Same concept going on there. The Chinese also believed in hungry ghosts. Hungry ghosts, basically their festival happened on the 15th night of the 7th month. The Chinese celebrate this ghost festival. This is again heaven and earth and the underworld. They all kind of open up during this period of time. But what will happen is you'll have those known as hungry ghosts. Now, hungry ghosts, how do they come about? Well, there's a few ways to become a hungry ghost. In one way is that you did not properly venerate your loved ones while you're alive, practice the ancestor cult, and because of your negligence, you become a hungry ghost. Another way to become a hungry ghost is that your relatives kind of forgot you, and then you become a hungry ghost because you were not fed upon the sacrificial altar that was placed before you after you died, so you can navigate the world beneath. Another reason is you're just a really bad person. So a hungry ghost has a real large mouth, a pencil thin neck, and everything that you put in your mouth is ash. So they have to be placated through various means, and sometimes they make a hungry ghost house for them to inhabit, and they'll practice various rituals to ward them off. We're back to similarities that we ran into when it came to the lemurs. I want to tell you another touching story. I love telling odd stories, and this is a great Chinese story. It's the story of Ning and Nai. It dates from written down in 1680 CE. The story goes that Ning visits a temple, and when he visits a certain temple, he is visited by a ghost of Nai, and she's a beautiful maiden, and she tries to seduce him, but he resists, owing to his belief in virtuous conduct. Two other travelers were also staying in the temple, but they succumb to her temptations. In fact, what happens is that the next morning, he finds them with holes pierced through their soles of their feet and their blood completely drained. Oh, he's glad he wasn't seduced by Ni. But Ni then comes to respect Ning and his virtue in resisting her advances, and tells him that she had died when she was only 18 years old and came under the control of a monstrous demon who inhabited the ground where she was buried. And it was that demon that fed upon those visitors, and whom, of course, obviously, through her, seduced these people. Well, Ning is obviously pretty upset by all this, and Nai shows where she is buried underneath the floor of the temple. So Ning takes her bones out of the temple and gives it a appropriate funeral. And you're thinking that's the end of the story. No, it's not. Because he was so virtuous and gave her a proper burial, he returns to life. I know. And Ning and Ni then marry and have many children and live happily ever after. You didn't see that one coming. So the Ning and Ni, that would be a great story for a movie, wouldn't it? I don't know. The Ning and Ni story, because it has just a strange twist at the end that you wouldn't expect. Okay. Then, of course, you have India. India, again, same ghost stories. And even like hungry ghost-like stories, Indian ghosts were known as bhoots, Bhoots. They appear as humans but have backward feet. That's pretty creepy, right? You know, the feet are on backwards, and the feet are thought to appear backwards to symbolize that something has gone, terribly wrong. Bhoots materialize when the person dies before their ordained time on earth, because when your time is up in Hinduism, then you simply reincarnate to the next life. Is that making sense? In some cases, after you go through the wheel of samsara, right? You're born, you live your life, you die, and based upon your karma, actions either go up in the next life or down. But in some cases, there's also just a little mini heaven or heaven-like place. Well, in this case, you're supposed to die, but you never got to that point. You died before your ordained death. So this gives you a little extra space to deal with to complete your current life. And so Boots are going around saying, hey, I want my life back. I want it to be completely fulfilled. And so what they will try to do is jump into the bodies of other people and live through them. So they're going to possess them and then live out the rest of their time duration of samsara through that other person. That's pretty creepy, right? You can guess that women who die in childbirth, they become they become pretty angry, and what they do is they try to steal babies away from those who give birth, and in some cases will steal the mom as well. Ooh, right? Those are known, by the way, as churails. If you want to know, Churail. And there's obviously lots of ghost stories throughout India, especially, for example, what's called Bangar Fort in Rajasthan. The story goes is that this ascetic on the hill said, as long as you don't build your fort so tall that the towers shadow my little shack on top of the hill, then you will not be cursed. And of course, they forget about that, and they build the fortress too tall, and it shadows this ascetic's fort. He curses them, and the top parts that shadow his fort are thrown asunder, and it's claimed that to this day, it's haunted, and you hear all these voices moving, sounding through the halls and so forth. The Mayans. I thought we'd kind of do a little trip around the world. Why not? The Mayans, they also believe in ghosts. The place of the underworld is known as Xibalba, and for them, they have the same kinds of ghosts that go around and haunt things and are restless. There's one story I want to tell, though. The story is of two beautiful women. One is known as Shibam, and the other is Utsu. Shibam and Utsu. Shibam, she was treated poorly in life by the respectable people of the town because she was a prostitute. So as a result, she is considered, people didn't want to get near her, to touch her, except she was very kind to the lower classes because she had a good heart and she was kind. And so whatever she earned, she gave a portion of that and gave it to the poor. Then there was Utsu. She was highly regarded because she was of the upper classes and she came from a good family and observed all the social etiquettes, but she was hard-hearted and cruel and cared for no one but herself. Well, what happens is Shibam, one day, she dies. And they smell as this aroma comes out of her hut, and it is beautiful. It's like perfume coming out. Beautiful perfume. And also the story goes is that the people and the various animals, she helped animals, circled around her hut in reverence to her. Well, then what happened is Utsu, she died, and this terrible stench came from her because she, even though she looked good, inside she was evil. And she, as a ghost, then observed all the attention that the prostitute received, and all the love and kindness where hardly anybody wanted to revere her. She became very angry. And as a result of that, she became an angry spirit. Uh, and uh, and so, long and short of it is that she assumed human form and awaits at the crossroads for travelers. If a man pays attention to her, she seduces and then kills him. While if the traveler is a woman, she punishes her by afflicting her peace of mind. And so, within Mayan culture, in some cases, even into 2020, they still tell this story. The reason why I know that is because I heard this story this semester from one of my students as well, who is from the Yucatan Peninsula. So this story still goes on. Isn't that fascinating? And I learn a lot by teaching these classes, and I have them write reflection papers. But you have to remember the Mayans are still around. They didn't go anywhere. Okay. Uh, Obviously, then of course the Aztecs. The Aztecs also have their ghosts. Once again, who steal children and men at the crossroads. One interesting factor about the Aztecs is that sometimes they bury dogs with you, because if your spirit is restless and you can't find peace and nobody's going to help you, the spirit of your dog is going to lead you to the other side. It's like, dog have any choice in the matter? No. But anyway, obviously you have Day of the Dead. That's connected to these beliefs. And again, this is when things run, I'm looking at my time, as the veil runs thin. Just like the veil runs thin at Samhain, right? In Europe, in Northern Europe. Obviously, this occurs beginning on October 31st at sundown, goes until November 2nd. And the dead during this time were thought to walk freely through the world during this time, and people prepare meals which their departed friends and relatives enjoyed while alive. During this period of time, also cattle were slaughtered and salted for winter, and bones were burned, a practice which gave rise to bone fires or bonfires. There we go. The darker side of Samhain, of course, is that the dead were restless, some of them, and were free to roam about. And so sometimes people initiated the practice of wearing masks so they wouldn't be recognized by the spirits. So you have that going on. Then we move on to the Middle Ages. I wish I could spend forever in each period, but we're just kind of getting tastes of different beliefs. Another story during the Middle Ages, in 856 CE, we have our first poltergeist story that takes place in a farmhouse in Germany, with physical disturbances such as loud noises or objects falling or being thrown around. We have the story of the bath keeper from the mid-9th century. A priest is visiting the baths on a regular basis, and he always has the same attendant who takes care of him, undresses him, and of course rubs him down and so forth. He's a bath attendant, and the priest says, "I want to give you something as a reward for being such a great servant." And the man says, "No, I can't." And it's like, "Why?" "Because I'm dead." "What?" "Yeah, I was the old bath owner. I'm caught in purgatory, and if you could pray for me, get me out of here, it would be really appreciated." That's the story of the bath keeper. Like I said, I love telling really non-conventional stories. Another story going along here is the story Popeye Buckland. This is fascinating. What happened here is he hears a sound of rustling through the forests. There's a big group moving through, and all of a sudden he sees thousands of people walking by. These are marchers. He takes a look at them, and he first sees peasants who are carrying across their necks and shoulders their clothes and their animals and furniture and worldly goods. Then came hundreds of women riding side saddle on horses, but the saddles were marked with red hot nails. And as the women rode, they would jump off their saddles into the air and then land back on the nails, leaving them burned and stabbed. After that came the crowds of priests, and they had blackened faces. I mean, it's pretty terrifying. And then you had smoky nights at the end. He was wondering who they were, and all of a sudden he recognized a few. And so the story is there are these night marchers, this army of the dead that go through various forests. Every now and then, purgatory opens up and allows them to march about as a reminder of what can happen if you do not pray for those who are in this land of limbo. Ooh, okay. It's known as Harlequin's army. Now, a lot of the stories connect to getting people out of purgatory, as you can imagine. But you have one story where this person's constantly being followed. This is the monk of Byland in the 1300s. He's constantly being followed by this ghost horse that turns into this floating ball of light, and then a spirit of a man. And he said, why are you following me? He's like, can I carry your beans for you? Sure, you can carry the beans for me. And so the man carries his beans across the river, and then the man disappears. Apparently, he just needed to finish a certain job. You have another spirit that is pretty irritating, that follows people around going, how? And finally, he was cast out and returned back to the underworld. You have another one who attacked another person, and long and the short of it is that when he spoke not out of his mouth, but out of his chest. And he was placated and given a proper burial as well. So lots of medieval stories. But let's move on. And I'm looking at my time. It's going by too fast. Let's tell the story of ghost ships. Not only do we have ghost stories with people, but of ships. One of the most popular took place around 1812. It's the story of the Sarah Soul. And the story pretty well goes as follows. Once upon a time, there was a lady who's being contested by two men, and they both loved her, George Leverett and Charles Jose. They were both fighting for her. Charles Jose, he was a lot more ardent and persistent, but really kind of scared her off. And so she decided to marry George Leverett instead. Well, Jose never forgot. He was pretty upset. George Leverett, he christened his ship after his wife by the name of Sarah Soul, and he's going about. But Jose never forgot. So Jose one time started following the Sarah Soul ship from behind, and he boarded the ship. And then he actually shot first a whole bunch of cannons over, killing much of the crew. Then he boarded the ship and killed the rest, save for, of course, the husband, right? Save for Leverett. What he did is then tie Leverett by his one leg from the mast, and he hung upside down and left him there to die. Well, what happened is this ghost ship went around, and the ghost crew slowly came back to life. And they haunted supposedly these waters from 1812 all the way to the 1890s. The ghost ship, at first, the ghost crew. It kind of sounds like a Pirates of the Caribbean, right? Right, doesn't it? Where these stories come from, right? But yeah, couldn't take no for an answer. Anyway, sorry. Um, okay, so there are other stories beyond that. Abraham Lincoln was. There's lots of ghost stories around Abraham Lincoln, especially during the time of Franklin Roosevelt of all times. Abraham Lincoln supposedly was haunting the White House. And one story is fascinating. Most people don't know this one. Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands, who's a very devout Calvinist Christian, was staying in the White House, and she was reading her Bible. And she heard a knock on the door. She opened up the door, and she saw a man wearing a tall top hat with a long beard, and she had no idea who Abraham Lincoln was. Interesting. And described him exactly. And they said, yeah, that was the ghost of Abraham Lincoln. It's like, oh, really? Wow. And she's a religious person. So there's no agenda behind this. She thought it was a visitor, but that wasn't supposed to be visiting her that night. And then he disappears. Like, that's the weirdest thing. So lots of stories. Well, spiritualism becomes popular. You got to be able to reach the dead. And after the 19th century, there's a lot of wars. And when there's a lot of wars, there's a lot of death. And there's a lot of people who are left behind. And they want to seek after the spirits of their loved ones. And they do various means in order to try to contact them. And so spiritualism becomes very popular. Certainly Manuel Swedenborg was the person who lived from 1688 to 1772. He believed he possessed the ability to communicate directly with the dead. And his ideas kind of mix with a certain Franz Mesmer, 1734 to 1815, who had what's called mesmerism, who used hypnosis to be able to kind of contact the unconscious. And so their ideas then crossed over to the United States, and a certain Andrew Jackson Davis brought them over and popularized the spiritualism movement. And so, in fact, you have Kate and Margaret Fox were popularized this idea even further, communicating to spirits through rapping noises that are audible to onlookers. And this became even popular with Mary Lincoln. But I got to tell you, looking at my time here, I'm going to tell you, though, skepticism is on the rise. People are thinking, I don't know if we're going to believe this or not. So things start to change and shift. If you hadn't noticed, when we take a look at ghosts and spirits, sometimes they're solid and sometimes they're like a vapor. Sometimes you can touch them and other times you can't. When we enter into the 19th century, it all becomes a vapor. It all becomes something that we cannot fully touch, but something that we can see. This is the big change as we're now gaining the so-called rational mind. So you're going to have a certain Charles Olier who spoke in 1848. And he said, anyone who thinks he has seen a ghost may take the vision as a symptom that his body and his health is deranged. So skepticism is on the rise. John Ferrier wrote as follows, that ghosts are simply vivid visual memories that keep coming back. Jacques Francois declared that the experience of ghosts are merely hallucinations. You're going to have a Dr. Mick Christine says that ghosts are basically external, objective, and theologically structured to the internal, subjective, and psychological haunted world of personal experience. But they're not real. It's something wrong with us, something that throws us off. So you're going to have the creation of the Ghost Club in 1862. Some of the famous members are Charles Dickens and Arthur Conan Doyle. And they start to go around, and some of them try to debunk the ghost stories. Others try to prove them, but didn't keep very good notes, unfortunately. Charles Dickens himself didn't seem to be very resolute on the situation. He was very interested in the psychological aspects of ghost sightings, and at times presented ghosts as subjective constructs of a troubled and guilty mind. You see this quite a bit in the Christmas Carol, right? I mean, really Scrooge himself is besought with so much guilt and fear, and so yes, he sees that maybe what's going on is psychologically something wrong with him, or something wrong with his body, as we talked about. A bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. But then again, Dickens wrote another work called The Haunted House in 1853, where he seems to believe that places or spaces can indeed be haunted. So what is that? So then we move into more of a scientific age. We have the beginning of the Society for Psychical Research, founded in 1882, really trying to organize the study of ghosts. In fact, a certain Frederick Myers documents 701 cases of these possible apparitions, but we're still not sure. He knocks off quite a few of them as being frauds, but a few he could not. And then, of course, it was believed that this particular group were not scientific enough, and so the American Society for Psychical Research will form in 1885, and they will go ahead and go through more realistic perspectives. I want to wrap up. I'm looking at, I got 5 minutes. I want to wrap up a few things. I want to say that, William James, he's the famous one that really did help start the study of psychology, right? He's a very important person. What I like about him, he wrote a work on varieties of religious experience. He looked at a certain Lenora Crow, who was a ghost channeling medium. And he says, I cannot resist the conviction that knowledge appears which she has never gained by the ordinary waking use of her eyes and ears and wits. And he goes on to say that religious experiences are oftentimes beyond our scientific ability to understand them, to comprehend them. And he says it is in the realm of the unknowable. How can we know for sure they do not exist? So what he says, that we need to just judge them as unexplainable and go at it like that. You're going to have others that will say the same. You guys ever heard of Carl Jung? Carl Jung said the same thing. In fact, he had lots of experiences with supposedly ghosts. We talked about one day in 1916. He heard something, and then one of his daughters saw something. Another daughter, completely separate in a different room, felt something, and then he heard the bell ring, and then he actually visually saw something. He says, hey, I'm not supposed to believe in these things, but I'm seeing it with my own eyes. How can I disprove it? And yet I can't prove it scientifically. So it goes into this realm in between. And of course, you're going to have others that go into, like Joe Nickell. He is at the University of Kentucky. For him, while many ghost stories are hoaxes, others, he said, are misinterpretations of natural phenomena, much like miracles. And he believes that there are no haunted places, but there are haunted people. He does talk about an idea known as pareidolia, which he says accounts for seeing and hearing or perceiving ghosts. So basically, the idea is that when we see something out of the corner of our eyes, we don't understand what it is, and so we mentally make it something familiar, and we fill in that space with that whatever it is that's familiar, and that becomes our own ghost because we didn't understand what it was, like a white owl, so to speak. Hope this makes sense. Then, of course, Nickel talks about that the approach of so-called ghost hunters simply one of mystery mongering. A certain Michael Persinger talks about the fact that he says that seeing ghosts are connected to various natural physical mechanisms, that certain places and spaces have some kind of energy or feeling that makes us see things or feel things, and then we interpret it a certain way, including maybe even underwater sites, underground water moving through below. And then, of course, I love Ramachandran's perspectives. He's at the University of California, San Diego. I love this. It's going to take a little time. I know we're going to go over for a few seconds, but we got to talk about this. It's called the phantom limb. That's right. People, they get their arm cut off, their leg cut off, and you know what? They still feel that limb. They still feel it. It's really there. And so how can we explain this? It leaves some kind of imprint behind. He also talked about the so-called bedroom intruder. And of course, the idea that, we have these night terrors, right, that we experience. And that also there are parts of our mind that we don't know that connect to certain ideas that we never even thought of that are deep within our subconscious. Like with the Ouija board, when you're moving things back and forth, sometimes it reveals certain ideas and thoughts at a deeper level that you didn't know about, that's manifesting through actual movements. And so the same thing can happen with your eyes, that you can see things that you ordinarily wouldn't think to see, that's tapped down below. And of course, you have others. I love the test by Richard Wiseman because what they did, and this I'll conclude with this, is they took a place that was considered extremely haunted, the Hampton Court Palace, and they decided to be scientific about it. So what they did is they had people visit, not knowing anything about what this place is, and have them go about the various rooms, describing what they feel in the various rooms, not knowing the background, not knowing the history. And they wrote down on a chart what they felt and where they saw it. When they finished going through it, it turned out that the majority of the places where they located something, where the majority, where they felt something or saw something or said something, were the same places that had been seen for centuries before. The very same places. So now what has happened is the scientific method. Controlled environment. That's good science. So is it coincidence or is there something to it? We didn't prove ghosts, but you know what we did? We did not disprove them either. And I think that's where we need to go. I think the best and most healthy way to look at all this is to realize is that there's something beyond our understanding and beyond something that we can prove. One thing that's fascinating is I know I took you through this journey and it seemed really long because there's so many stories. But did you notice the stories are basically the same over and over and over again? And how can you deny a crowd of witnesses over the entire world, over millennium, over thousands and thousands of years? How can you deny all that evidence? Right? Is it just a bit of undigested food, or are we really seeing something? I think that we should take a position and say, you know what? If you don't believe, that's fine. But the best thing to say is, I don't know. I think that's the best course. Not to say, I don't believe in ghosts. The best thing to say is, I don't know. Because you really don't know. In fact, I will mention that, I didn't quote this one Chinese scholar, but he says if you take all the eyewitnesses based within a legal conception, that would be considered evidence. The witness reports alone would be considered something that could be brought to the courts. Are you guys getting this? So the point of the matter is, and we may not be able to find it through science, or maybe we have, but I think also we are taught in our society not to believe in ghosts. And so automatically we throw it down in Western society. But I tell you what, if you were raised in many places of the world, the fact of not believing in ghosts would be uncanny and unbelievable, because that's simply the way the world is. Thank you. Whew. I got a lot of material done. oh man, that's a lot of, that's 46 pages. So you got 46 pages of materials of put together. But any questions? Because I covered a lot as I throw my notes. Thank you, Michael Malone, for being here. Anybody have any questions?
With the Lincoln story, would mysticism in America would have been really popular through Lincoln's wife, because she was very into spiritualism?
Yes.
Was mysticism in America influenced by her and her belief?
Okay, so spiritualism was a huge deal in the 1840s and 1850s before Mary Lincoln got into it. But I will say that Mary Lincoln, being into spiritualism, did not. It did encourage many other people to get into it as well. I mean, you have the wife of the President of the United States, and what you may not know also is that Abraham Lincoln, at one point during a seance, opened his eyes and peeked, and he claimed, saw in his journal, that he saw a piano rise a little bit. So Abraham Lincoln was a believer too. Most people don't know that.
Yeah, I've heard the story of him having a dream of seeing another president's funeral, and that was supposedly Kennedy's funeral at the White House.
Oh, it was his funeral.
It was his funeral.
Yeah.
I heard it was Kennedy's.
Yeah, no, it was his. He did see. He wrote this in his journal. I think 10 days before he died. He wrote down that he saw this. I know, it's kind of scary, right? He saw his own death.
I always thought it was it was like a traveling in time.
Oh, I like that though. I mean, there are lots of connections between Lincoln and Kennedy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah. And you also have the Lincoln Ghost Train. There's yeah. Those people in the 19th century, they have a lot of time on their hands. So they claim that the funeral train of Abraham Lincoln was riding the rails decades afterwards, and you hear the moan of the whistle blowing, and all of a sudden, with its of course huge chimney, arc train of Abraham Lincoln carrying his body. My dad discovered the last photograph of Abraham Lincoln. If you're interested in that, type in Ron, R-O-N, and my last name, Rietveld, Rietveld. And you'll see that my father discovered the last photograph of Abraham Lincoln in his coffin. He's in his coffin. So, and it was ordered destroyed by Mary Lincoln, and one copy somehow got stuck away into a file. And my dad was asked at the age of 14 to go through the state papers because he was a kind of a genius of Abraham Lincoln since he was 5. And he discovered this, and it was news coast to coast. And in fact, it's the finding is immortalized today at the Lincoln Presidential Museum. So if you go there today to Springfield, you'll see a whole display of my dad's discovery. But anyway, so kind of cool stuff, huh? So yeah, I grew up with Abraham. I actually have Civil War letters here in the house. Here. Hundreds of them. and not published. So I sit around reading them. Terrible. Okay. Anyway, moving right along. Any other questions? Any others? No other questions?
I had one question about the Roman lemurs. Did that have anything to do with the idea of ancient Lemuria and the Lemurian Fellowship and all that kind of thing?
No.
Okay.
They're just little. They have anything to do with the monkeys? No, but the lemurs, yeah, no, they're spirits. You're going to have throughout the entire world. You're going to have these spirits, restless elementals that cause havoc, and you have to do various rituals to have them go away. And sometimes they are also understood as little people and fairies and elves, and as we go to other places and you ward them off, you sometimes have to do certain rituals, like, if you're going, keep the door open, the back door open, have them go through. If they but anyway, these stories are all over the place. They're very popular throughout the world. Any other questions? The Greeks have them too. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Is this a dead topic? Most of us have to get another question.
You didn't talk about any cursed objects, but that's another thing.
Well, yeah, and I do have people from my class here, and they know we talked about cursed objects quite a bit in our class. So yeah, but there are obviously we do have, of course. The question is some cases spirits will attach themselves to an object, and it will stay there dormant until the time that somebody moves it, and then it was taken out of its familiar context to another place. Then it seems to unleash this spirit that was before that dormant. And of course, you have this a lot with the idea of mummies too. You shouldn't take things from a mummy's tomb, or you should unwrap mummies. But we haven't had any mummies being unwrapped in 2020, right? Not at all. So no curses on that. But yeah, so oftentimes there's a curse that goes along with that. You're going to see that in The Exorcist, right? At the beginning with Pazuzu. Pazuzu is moved, and guess what happens? That's right. Father Marin has to deal with this demonic spirit that follows him and causes havoc in his life, and eventually does end up in his death. And the other Jesuit too. Yes. Any questions? Any other questions? Anything else I can talk about? There's so much. Haunted houses, haunted places, haunted spaces. So it's not
something for next year.
Yeah. Maybe I'll talk about that. Maybe I should talk about haunted spaces and places for another talk at some point. Mm-hmm. Again, my students here who are here, some of you guys, hi Victor, that know that we spent a lot of time talking about haunted places and spaces as well. So, okay, are we all good? No more
So
questions?
when you talk about haunted places like the Roman legions marching through England that people see as residual hauntings, they're not interactive or spirits per se, but
Yep.
they're imprinted in the area that people.
The energies are imprinted, right? You have the idea that in many cases the concept of the spirit is like a photograph. It's caught in time, and then certain weather conditions enable it to repeat, or certain periods of time, and so it's just like a camera or a photograph that comes to life. So it's not really alive. It's just it's just an echo of the past that's been trapped. And remember, organic materials have memory. So some people say that because of that, something terrible happens and you're in a wooden house, like a wooden Victorian, something terrible happens, it gets absorbed into the cells of the wood itself. And then, of course, certain weather conditions or whatever it may be, or as it rots, right, will unleash and create these echoes, which is fascinating. The Victorian houses are always looked at as the haunted houses during our times. And I've talked about this quite a bit, but I want to say something kind of a little different here. Haunted Victorians are looked at as haunted because even though they were beautiful and pristine during the 1880s and 1890s, they're a mix of different kinds of styles. One problem with the Victorian house is as they grow old, the wood rots, everything starts to sag, and they look really kind of scary and anthropomorphic. And the guy by the name of Adams, as the creator of the Addams Family cartoon, he memorialized the Victorian house, and that popularized it as the haunted house. But the question I'm going to bring up that I haven't brought up before is, what was the haunted house before that time in the 19th century? Here's a little bit of fun trivia that most people don't know, is that I have a whole bunch of books on 19th century ghost stories. And you know what the haunted house then for them is? For some strange reason, the late 18th century. It's a late 18th century house was the creepy, scary house, understood almost like in the same way as the Victorian. It's always this 18th century house that's fallen apart. And here's a little bit more trivia. In the 18th century, mid 18th century, you know what kind of place was always haunted for them? A castle. It's always the haunted castle. So a little bit of fun trivia. We do advance and change as time goes on about what is a haunted place. So we say, oh, Victorian, that's proverbial. And look at Disneyland, right? But if we go back further, it's like, ooh, 18th century decadence. And then before that, the castle. Any other thoughts?
Professor, when you say that these things are sometimes activated by certain weather conditions, is there any consistency on what weather conditions that would be?
Yes. So they will say that when the weather is, now depends. When the weather happens to be unusually damp, like on a rainy, stormy day, they will say that there's a, which I know in your field, that's kind of interesting because you're dealing with liquid, right? Water, maybe going into the pores of the wood. Who knows? But oftentimes it happens to be moist when you see these things, So, and of course, obviously wood will also move and change. Now, I'm not saying this is real or not. I'm just saying these are the perspectives or thoughts that when the weather changes. In other cases, it could be, I don't know this one, it could be maybe when it dries, when it's hot. So different kinds of energy gets trapped in different kinds of time. But I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. But many people do say the weather conditions, and they also say what's underneath the house or the place. They will say that if there happens to be certain minerals that are underneath the ground, or there happens to be groundwater in certain areas, or there happens to be something that's magnetic underground, that it will affect something that's directly above ground, which could be something that throws us off just enough where we are open to something that throws us off, and our mind will then fill in that gap. Does that make sense? You know, so something that kind of throws us off enough where we're open to maybe some kind of participation to something that goes into a liminal space, goes into a place that that we do not fully comprehend, and it jumps in there, and we are vulnerable to it. Great question, by the way, Victor. He's a great student in my class. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. We feel like we've covered it, right? You have a whole bunch of more ghost stories. One last question for you. I'm getting back at you guys, right? Okay. One last question, and we'll call it a night. Of all the ghost stories, which one was your favorite? Which one is the one you're going to walk away with? And just obviously volunteers. Which one you go, okay, this ghost story I'm going to tell to a friend.
I like the one with the ancient Greek girl who died in a virginal state and came back to have a little fling before she went away for
Yeah, the virginal fling, right?
Yeah.
You know, the general, he was not good enough. So she had to come back and sleep around, right? Yeah. Okay. That's definitely one you're not going to forget. It's hard to forget.
That's a strong human instinct.
Yes, it is. It is.
Dorian says he's going to remember the Chinese couple.
I think there should be a movie on that. I really do. That would be seriously, or
Somebody hasn't.
maybe there has, but I mean, one that I can maybe Google. You know, somebody says the Mayan story. Oh, the two ladies, right? The prostitute and the one that's well-to-do. One who was right. Yeah. Yes. Hi, Cindy. Yeah. That's a good one. Yeah, I like that one quite a bit. It's very much a moral tale, and I like the fact that it comes from Mesoamerica. You know, again, making connections that people act the same way in Mesoamerica as elsewhere when it comes to judging people. What else? What's another good one? You know, we'll do.
I'm not sure if it counts as a ghost story, but them going to the courthouse and people seeing similar things in each of the rooms is pretty fascinating, especially because it kind of does set a framework for testing supernatural.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Hey Victor, tell them what you do, what you're studying.
Electrical engineering.
Yeah, he's involved, and he's very modest about what he does. Right. Okay, so one more and we're off.
Well, you live on a graveyard. What weird things have you seen?
Well, I don't live. I live next to one. So,
Okay.
down the hill. Oh yeah, I see things all the time. We won't talk about that here.
I'm sorry. I outed you. I've seen plenty of things too. The Fullerton 20 is really haunted. The old section, by the way.
Yeah.
And Cal State Fullerton has a whole history of ghost stories.
Oh yeah, there's lots of ghost stories at Cal State Fullerton. Too many of them.
Yeah.
I've seen too many of them, and my fellow professors have seen too many of them. So just don't be there late at night. That's all I can tell you, especially on the 8th floor.
The weird elevator story. The one that goes down to the basement when you don't want to go there. Yeah,
that's horrifying. It inadvertently takes you for rides, different places. Mm-hmm. Yep. So, all right. Well, I think we covered it. Thank you again for being here, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night,
everyone.
Good night.